Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're presenting our contemporary crash course, Alternating Currents, a conversation about beauty. I'm Renee Barilleaux, Chief Curator here at the McNay, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. The presentation was organized in conjunction with our exhibition, Beauty Reigns, a Baroque Sensibility in Recent Painting, which continues here through August 17th. I want to thank Rosemary Hickman, who's in our education department, who organized this program tonight, and she's organized a number of programs in conjunction with the exhibition. And also, I'd like to thank all of the generous funders and supporters of the exhibition that we've had. It's been really gratifying to bring together a lot of community support. Tonight's conversation is led by Lilly Wei, and it includes 3 artists whose work are exhibited in Beauty Reigns: Kamrooz Aram, Fausto Fernandez, and Jiha Moon. Lilly Wei is based in New York, where she's an independent curator and critic, and many of you probably know her writings from Art in America and Art News. She also contributed one of the essays in the exhibition's book, the essay titled "Here's Looking at You," where she explored beauty as well as the work of the artists who are exhibiting in the exhibition. Lilly has been to San Antonio a number of times, so I'm delighted to be able to welcome her back tonight. Our 3 artists are from all around the world and the country. Kamrooz from Iran, living in Brooklyn. Fausto, born in El Paso, grew up in Mexico, and right now living in LA, but not for much longer. And Jiha Moon from South Korea, in Atlanta by way of Iowa. So they have a lot to talk about, all of these references that they've brought together and influences. And I'm going to now turn the program over to Lilly. And again, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for coming. We'll, I think, just start right in. So the topic is beauty, and given that all your work is beautiful, because Renee says so, because it is in this very beautiful show. One of the things I noticed in my very quick tour of the show right now, of course, is that is the color. I mean, there is so much color in this exhibition. And in an email conversation I had with Kamrooz, he thought about color as something that is very culturally loaded. And he cited David Batchelor's book called Chromophobia, which is actually the fear of color. And in it, he says, and if I just want to read it because I think it will be a prompt to start off our conversation, and I would like to see what all of the artists have as a response to it. So he says, this is David Batchelor, he says, "I believe, no exaggeration to say, that in the West, since antiquity, color has been systematically marginalized, reviled, diminished, and degraded. Generations of philosophers, artists, art historians, and cultural theorists of one stripe or another have kept this prejudice alive, warm, fed, and groomed. As with all prejudices, its manifest form, its loathing, masks a fear of contamination and corruption by something that is unknown or appears unknowable. This loathing of color, this fear of corruption through color, needs a name: chromophobia. More specifically, this purging of color is usually accomplished in one of 2 ways. In the first, color is made out to be the property of some foreign body, usually the feminine, the oriental, the primitive, the infantile, the vulgar, the queer, or the pathological. In the second, color is relegated to the realm of the superficial, the supplementary, the inessential, or the cosmetic, or the decorative. Color is dangerous, or it is trivial, or it is both. So, given that, any thoughts?
I do have thoughts. I've been in the opposite side of the spectrum of color. So I've had really good experiences with color and really bad experiences with color. And I think, I don't know, for example, the the bad experience that I've had was that I started, for many reasons, doing different types of colors in my paintings. But there was one time about 5 years ago, and it's probably the only time, I'm not generalizing everybody, but there was one person that I was having a show, and I just made the mistake to bring it was a show that was happening for a day, and I made the mistake of bringing the biggest painting that I had, when I should have just brought something smaller. And somebody came to me and said, you know, the problem with your painting is it looks too Mexican. and I wondered if my last name would have been Smith. You know, how would I associate the colors? So it was just associating my culture, which is pretty much something that I've been trying to. It wasn't intentional at the beginning, but then when people start bringing those things to me, then it becomes intentional. And in that occasion, I decided to make a series of black and white paintings, just to like, what would people, you know? So I think that's how that was one bad experience. I wouldn't call it bad, but it was just kind of like color is powerful, you know, and culture. And I mean, a good experience is in college, I started, you know, I was pretty young, so I would try to associate dark colors with sadness and bright colors with happiness. But I think over time I matured so that I had to kind of let go of those stereotypes of colors so that I can just kind of free myself to create whatever I wanted to do emotionally. Yeah. So that happened. So I don't know.
Well, I think something that I would mention that maybe refers a little bit to your experience with your painting looking quote unquote too Mexican, is the idea that, well, if we look at some of the other conversations that happen about certain kind of Eastern visual tropes, like let's talk about ornament, for example. We can look at the architect Adolf Loos, whose Ornament and Crime was written as, you know, it's perceived to be a proto-modernist text. I see it as a proto-fascist text as well because of the way that he talks about labor and the way that he also talks about the non-European. So when he gets into talking about ornament, he says that it's for those other people that are less sophisticated than the European aristocrats, and it's okay for them. And it's okay for criminals who have tattoos, but it's not okay for the modern European aristocrat to use ornaments, and especially in architecture in that case. But I think we can kind of connect that to a fear of color, a fear of ornament, a fear of, and maybe even a fear. I don't think it's so much a fear of beauty at that point, but maybe a certain definition of it.
Yeah, right. Well, when Lilly, you were reading from the book code, I almost liked every single thing you said because it's really kind of feed off the viewer, regular general audience who are looking at my work, and I can make association with the gay people, I can make association with Mexican people and Korean people, Western people. For me, the color is kind of like a code, and however I use a different combination of color from the viewer, I get a feedback from their relation to, and based on their experience, the color relationship kind of make a dialogue to communicate with the viewer. So I was kind of, in a way, like you, I had both experience, bad and good. And bad would be, like when I was in college in Korea, my professor were like, if you ever gonna go study in abroad, bring the sumi brush and then go like that with the sumi ink, everybody will be like, wow, like, Yeah. So it was like almost like, in a way, throwing in a position that, if you meet somebody, like you just pose like you can do taekwondo, but you can't really do it, but because you're Asian, they make association with that. Yeah. So for me, that was almost kind of like, yeah, but that's really not true. Like, I am not really trained as Korean traditional painter. How I look at it, like, Western traditional work or beautiful Renaissance etching or sepia drawing, I kind of approach it the same way looking at the Eastern, because I'm also younger generation. I don't really know everything just because I'm Asian. But, at the same time, as I get older and have more experience living in America, this can be a key and code to communicate with the general viewer. And I don't really make only work for the viewer, I make work for myself. But I can giggle when I make work, and I have a little conversation of how I throw this color yellow, and when people look at it, it's like just color yellow, but in Korean people, they think about blonde, beautiful blonde is something exotic, something they don't have it. Asian kids dye their hair blonde all the time, wear blue contact lenses, something they're not born with, they want to copy it. But at the same time, with yellow, it's for Western people, it's to represent Asian. How ironical it is. I always think about that, and I always use that in my work. And it could be a multiple. My approach is serious, but also at the same time ridiculous and a little bit funny.
Yeah.
I always see color that way.
Well, color, is in this term, it's kind of phrased one way. It's like for the other. But then, on the other hand, white is an interesting word. I mean, it's a very loaded word. And just to throw that into the mix, I mean, I was at a talk the other day, and Elaine Scarry was talking about beauty. And one of the things I think I don't remember exactly what she said, but she brought up the notion of white equals fair, or equals beauty, and then unfair, is like perhaps not white. I mean, I'm not sure. And these kind of color codings are interesting. I don't know if this is digressive, but it's just that just in the culture itself, it is so encoded in even like film. I heard this on an NPR piece that this black model said that a lot of film had been calibrated to white skin so that black models never looked as well because the gradations, they weren't sensitive, to the way black skin reflected light. And I could say maybe, the same. That's why all my photographs look terrible. They're not taking into effect Asian skin or whatever the coloration is. And then, and even perhaps even more distressing is that like some of those sensors are also calibrated to a certain color of skin. So like if you're wearing black or if you are darker skinned, they, like in the washrooms, they may not go on for you. Anyway, just a complete digression. But back to the notion of what is expected when you make a work. And I was interested in the point you brought up because I was thinking about that. So if we look at Fausto Fernandez and Kamrooz Aram and Jiha Moon, and we look at their paintings and we think, yes, it makes a certain sense. But what kind of a sense would it make? And it would also, I think, make a certain sense if their name were, what?
Smith.
Frank Ferdinand, no,
Right.
that's not good. Frank, or Kevin Adams, or Jeanette Moore, because actually we have a Nancy Lorenz in the show. And if you looked at the show, you will see that her influences are traditional Asian forms, and she is, American. So I think that the conversation around that work would be entirely different.
Well, I think that part of it is what influences do we choose to kind of focus on, or what influences do the critics or the audience choose to focus on. I think that in any of the artist's work, there's more than their cultural background, because their cultural background is actually much bigger than a national or ethnic kind of experience. So, when you said Frank, my first thought was Frank Stella, because that's an artist that I think about a lot, and an artist I think that gets a pass. Like, I think he makes what I think of as ornamental art, and he did especially in the early work in the black paintings. But he gets a pass for making ornamental work because there's this kind of, it's attached to a modernist discourse, whereas someone else that might make ornamental work that gets attached to a traditional discourse or an Eastern discourse, well, they wouldn't even refer to it as a discourse because it's perceived to be devoid of ideas. And there is an experience or a history there that is significant, and the patterns are significant, and there's a meaning to it, but it's perceived to be sort of vapid because it's decorative and it's just filling the space. But I think that Frank Stella is
Vapid or filling the space?
Well, yeah, I mean, I always say that a Frank Stella is just as capable of becoming decorative as a Persian carpet, and a Persian carpet is just as capable of carrying content as a Frank Stella, or a Jackson Pollock, for that matter.
Well, but the iconography of a Persian carpet is meaningful.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can, explain or talk a little about that.
Well, sure. I mean, actually, it's funny. The painting's up right now, and these paintings were all, that floral form is derived from a detail of a Persian carpet that I photographed in a New York carpet store, and that's significant for me because that's where the carpet is most commodified, and it's most kind of exoticized, and it becomes, the most decorative object. But the experience I had, my first kind of look at Persian carpets beyond the so-called decorative was when I went back to Iran after many years, and I met a guy called Mortaza Momayyez, who's the father of graphic design, modern graphic design in Iran. He's since passed away. And he had just written an essay about the Persian carpet. He explained to me that the Medallion Carpet, and we were looking at one, it illustrates the various stages of spiritual development in Sufism. So when you go through a border, you enter at a border and you get to a floral area and you think you've arrived, but yet there's another border. And you keep going through these borders and the floral pattern grows and gets more intricate and more kind of complex and beautiful. And at the center of that is the medallion, which is when you're really arriving. And the center of the medallion is a dot which represents infinity and divine unification. And what was interesting for me is not that the specific meaning was interesting, but even just the idea that it had a meaning kind of changed my way of looking at ornament or patterns.
And
well, decoration, being always part of my work in a way, but I never thought of as a negative notion of it, because the decoration itself has a history of it in every country. It's part of their culture. Even folk art in Korea, they always have to have something decorative, and that kind of feed off like families' longevity, happiness, all that like good wishing stuff. And I also look at Pennsylvania Dutch and their kind of the folk art quality that are very similar to Korean folk art. And so the function is decoration, but I use that as a historical context and then combine them together, sort of make them very similar, that viewer almost in a way that kind of get confused, or they have their own belief to see, oh, that looks like Mandalian ducks. But then I tell them later, well, actually they're from other birds from Pennsylvania Dutch, and they almost like get mad at me because what they see, they want to believe. And I think that when people say the decorative elements, I can tell sometimes when they ask questions whether they're using it negative terms or they're just referencing something. And I don't really get offended anymore because it is part of what it is. And I look at it and I copy and I try to combine those folk art, popular culture. That's what I'm dealing with, part of my work. My work is, I try to make it for everybody. So I think that's never gonna go away, and it's always been in the history of everybody. The general viewer need to enjoy what's out there. It's something that in Korea only king and queen use it, like super, super fancy, like the quilt, the rainbow stripe quilt. They're like every single stripe's quilted, but then in Korea it becomes chintz, that in the later on, like nobody can really afford that, so they print it out on the fabric. So it's like a silk screen in a way. So in a way, almost like for me, it's like Coca-Cola. It's the same taste. It's like $1. You can get it anywhere. So it's something democratic about. And I think the notion of decoration kind of feed off that the general viewer can enjoy. And I always try to combine that element for my work. So I don't know, I like I said, everything you mentioned, the queer, the feminism quality of everything, when I listen to it, that's everything I wanted. And I don't know if that's negative anymore, but like when we are having a conversation, from that person's context, I can tell whether that's negative connotation or not.
I have
it's negative for him, but I don't think it's so negative anymore.
Right.
But
I do have a little, just in my process,
yeah.
I think there's a really fine line of what's decorative and what's not, like fine art.
Yeah.
And I do struggle, not struggle, because I think I know a little bit of how to break it up. But I did a series of paintings that were very different than the ones I have in the show, but I did it for about 10 years, and they have a lot of heavy mechanical objects on them. And there's metaphors behind all of this, and there's about relationships and men and women and stereotypes, but I think part of the reason that I used heavy machinery also is because a lot of them had flowers, and flowers, they're floral, and they could be almost as pretty as I can make a wallpaper, and it could be really easy to look commercial. But I feel that the part that comes as art, and the part of me that comes in the paintings, it's by me adding those elements of machines, because to me they represent metaphors in relationships, because they're objects that would not function if they're not applied by other people's force. So I associate that machines, they're just stagnant. They just don't move without our force. So anyway, there's a story behind it. But so there's elements that I add to my work so that they kind of break that symmetry of design that would be really decorative, I guess. And so I guess, I don't know, maybe people would see them as decorative, but it doesn't bother me because ultimately it's whatever I want to do, but I do have struggle with that fine line of decorative.
I think it's maybe important to distinguish between what's ornamental and what's decorative and how we define those things. I would maybe propose that ornamental has a more kind of compositional quality, that it has to do with repetition and rhythm, and that decorative, we use that word so pejoratively when we talk about art, when we say that, that's just a decorative painting, right? We're dismissing it as something that's just sitting there on somebody's wall to fill space. Or let's say the patterns on these chairs in here, that's maybe decorative, but also ornamental.
It could be ornamental.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
But that ornamental can also have content, whereas decorative is implied that it doesn't have any content, that it doesn't mean anything, that it's just kind of there to fill the space.
But isn't that more, this diminishing of the ornamental, more a 20th century phenomenon? Because there has always been a strong tradition of ornament in almost, as you said, in almost every culture. So right. Even going back, like the Book of Kells, those beautiful illuminated manuscripts, very, very revered, and a lot of that has, great significance, symbolic significance. So,
yeah.
But just back to some of the things you're saying, like, what kind of imagery in your work might be culture specific?
Color specific?
Well, whatever, however you want to define
to my culture?
that. Yeah, or to,
I think...
How do you use that?
I grew up in El Paso. Well, I was born in El Paso, Texas.
Yeah, but you spent...
But I lived all my life
across the border,
yeah,
right?
So I never lived in El Paso. I was only born there.
Yeah.
And I lived in Juarez, 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I was creating what I think now is art. When I lived there, I was probably just being creative, painting skateboards, because that's what I liked to do when I was younger, like skateboard. I didn't think of art as a professional until I lived in Arizona. So my experience with art was not in the border, but I lived most of my time in the border. Creating art. And when I started making art, I think I started my career in Arizona. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started questioning my background, which I don't think I grew up. I was thinking, who am I? I was just kind of growing up. But the more that I started getting into this type of conversations, and even in school and in El Paso, and having discussions about culture, and that's when I started discovering who I am. And I think that's when I started thinking, okay, my work is definitely about discovering who I am, most importantly, because and I know we're talking about color, but it's a really heavy topic to being an artist from the border and having to be different. And I think my work it's definitely from a border artist perspective, but I just want to give another I want to flip the page, you know? I want to be different. I think it's like I'm trying to be different. Like I'm just trying to get away as possible from what's expected of me.
Of a border, of a so-called
Yeah,
border.
and especially now. I mean, I lived in Mexico for 25 years. I left 14 years ago. And then I just had a really happy life growing up. And especially now in the last 10 years, since there's been a lot of violence and the political issues and the defense, you know. Like when I hear that, it's just like my head wants to explode. Like I just don't want to hear it because I'm tired of it. But it's an important topic, and I'm willing to talk about it, but not in my work, you know, because I feel that I am that person. I am the border. I am the fence. I am the problems, and I don't see how I will grow if I keep bringing those themes in my work, you know? That's like my escape.
Yeah.
And my painting, I'm also really sensitive, I think, to those topics. I easily get aggravated. And I think my paintings are a way to change my personality. So if I make happy, colorful paintings, it kind of takes me out, it kind of puts me at ease, it makes me happy, you know? And I don't know. I guess I'm just.
But are you creating an alternate world or a?
Yeah, you know, what it does is this show. Mm-hmm. It brings me out of the border artist, border art scene. It brings me into the contemporary art world. It brings me into the company of these people, into being curated in this show that's about beauty, where they select me for the aesthetic of my work. You know, not always for my background, which is why I feel so happy to be here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel that I'm kind of in and out about it. Yeah. I have a separate project going on that, like you said, I have a project that are kind of detached to the subject, but some my multiple fan painting I'm revisiting and just bang it all the way down, all the way to the tip, like trying to be as much as Asian as possible, and kind of dig it deep and then see how far I can go. And I'm living in this country more than 13 years. I think now I just feel like it's not avoidable. Like who I am as a person, every time I go somewhere, they ask me, where are you from? And I have to prepare several answers, like, oh, I'm from South Korea, but that's, you're asking. But right now I'm living in Atlanta, but I live in Washington, D.C. a little bit. I went to school in Iowa. So all those things, it's like a pet.
I do the same
thing. As a
thing.
person, yeah. But that's all blend into the work. But then what people are asking is, where are you from? Is actually they're asking my nationality. So that's a really heavy question, and it's like I think I have a life to answer that question. So that's my subject matter, and I'm always in and out about it. Also, like I said, I kind of trick people, and I trick myself too, and using this type of color combination or iconography that you think it is what it is, but it is not what it is. Like what you're thinking at, like Asian-looking bushes, like, you know, that's actually Simpson's wife Marge's hair that you can see in the show. And there's a lot of things that, you know, you have to look at it carefully to see what you're really experiencing at it, because our first impression always kind of wrong. And then the color peony, like I'm looking at the images now, there's no peony blue, but I sort of changing the color of object that sort of making it slightly harder for people to recognize it. So, oh, that's pretty, but why is it blue? It's like peony usually come blue, white and pink and red. So I'm like using all the color. Like I live in Atlanta, Georgia, so peach become one of my favorite iconography. And I use peaches a lot because I see in Asian, you know, manuscript paintings also, Georgia is a big peach city, but you really don't see any peaches except Boston. So I really thought that it's like, it kind of has a multiple meaning of it, and then ask question, what we really think is original or authentic is in your head. or your little experience kind of blend in it.
The monolithic identities,
Oh,
I was just
in and
told,
out, yeah.
is no longer relevant. And, you know, because everyone does, I think a lot of people
The
are...
identity thing you were talking about, right? That your subject matter.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
wanted
you
to
said it's
in
to
and
your
out.
subject
Yeah, I'm
matter.
kind of like in and out, yeah.
And you seem to be varying, I don't know, I think you're burying it underneath those layers of
Well, I mean, I
paint.
think the question of identity is as complicated as the question of beauty, right? I think that, I mean, when you say, like, when we talk about who we are, how much of who we are is what we perceive ourselves to be, and how much of who we are is what other people perceive us to be, you know? And I think negotiating that is something that all of us up here have had to do, you know, to some extent with our cultural experience. As far as my own kind of engagement with certain culturally specific or historically specific ideas, that's just what I'm interested in. That's what I've grown to become interested in. And I think that the question of how culture is perceived, you know, is interesting to me. And so it's the ideas that I'm after, not really like who I am. It's I think maybe more outside of myself.
Yes, but it is who you are, but it's not, but you do not represent your, you know, you don't
Exactly, right.
represent all Iranian artists. None of them do. I'm just like, what
you know,
Ligon says too a lot.
I do like that I'm starting to get included in a few shows that have kind of related, not all the time, but about the border sometimes. But I like that they're including me now for being different. So they're including me, so like I get in shows that it's very, you know, well, there's this thing in Arizona, it's called Chico, like Mexico, Chicano, you know, which I'm not Chicano either. It's just always complicated. But
What are you?
well, I consider myself Mexican,
Yeah.
you know, or I'm Mexican American. But the difference is that I wasn't raised in Mexico, I wasn't raised in the United States. I was raised in Mexico. Well, that's another topic, but so I started this Chico Inc. in Arizona. They represent a lot of Chicano and Mexican American art. But they always invite me because there's a lot of Aztecs, Virgin Marys, angels, you know, craft art. And then they included me because I'm like really different. Nobody gets what I'm doing. But they, I don't know, they like it, you know, and I like that they push me to include me because I'm different. So like I feel like they're choosing me for who I am, which I like, you know.
When you mentioned the Virgin Mary and the kind of that kind of art, I think about something that's been on my mind for a while, which is this idea of the subjectivity of kitsch. You know, the idea that, you know, kitsch. When we're talking about beauty, kitsch is kind of seen as this decorative or kind of not meaningful, cheap, you know, accessible in the most kind of pejorative. You know, but I think that kitsch is really subjective. You know, when you look, and oftentimes when, you know, we in Western culture look to Eastern cultures and see certain elements of what we perceive to be kitsch, like if you go to a, you know, Mexican restaurant and you see the Virgin Mary and you're like, oh yeah, that's like a really interesting little kitsch painting, but it's actually sacred art, you know, for the person that made it and the meaning that it has.
I had a really good friend of mine that's Chicano, and he explained it really beautiful to me. And he said the reason that we paint these icons is because our background is Mexican. They never lived in Mexico, so they looked at those images for pride as to where they're from or their culture in the United States. Which in Mexico, we never painted like Virgin Marys or anything like that.
Interesting.
You know?
That's
It's cultural in this side of in the United States because they're proud of their Mexican background.
You never painted the Virgin Mary?
No, because I always went to church and everything, you know,
But they
growing
never,
up.
you didn't.
No, I mean I didn't. But none of my
other people.
not in Mexico. I mean, and now that I'm here in the United States, I have a lot of friends of mine that are Chicano that like express a lot of the Mexican backgrounds, but I never experienced that in Mexico. And even now, you know, and this is probably part of the contemporary art that I'm missing, because there's a lot of really beautiful Mexican contemporary art that's not stereotypical of what we think is Mexico. That's incredible art. It's just amazing. And so I've been to Mexico City, but No, I don't. I think I mean, I think that's it's a stereotype. You know?
But that's another subject too, which is that a contemporary Mexican artist often works in a contemporary idiom, an international idiom.
Right.
So I don't know that you would call him or her Mexican. You know, I was just listening. There were these young Chinese artists, young in the sense that they were born after 1976. So it's, you know, they were not the first wave of contemporary Chinese artists that have gotten recognition. And they were shown in Tampa, and one of the questions was, these are not what you would expect contemporary Chinese artists to be making, because they have more of an international language. But on the other hand, I'm not actually sure that the audience would have expected. What are they expecting? Pagodas, dragons? I mean, you know, it is part of the culture, but it isn't part of contemporary culture. Surely the audience has looked at the newspaper. I mean, China is probably the most like booming economy. They are building, you know, skyscrapers. I mean, everyone must know this, right? So I'm not sure that was the wrong assumption on the part of the people who are presenting the show. And I'd be curious, you know, what does anyone expect these days of an artist from another country? And that, of course, is, you know, I mean, there's no one thing, of course, but...
Right, well, the
but you want to say something.
The
Go
fortune
ahead.
cookie, I was thinking
The
about
fortune cookie?
right away when you were talking about Virgin Mary, the painting. You know, fortune cookie and the fortune cookie saying is not from China. You know, nobody knows what they are actually in China. And it's like an American thing. It's invented in some Japanese restaurant in San Francisco. So people like, you know, go...
And one guy was writing them all the fortunes, and he stopped. And now they're not good at all anymore.
But I think it's hilarious, you know, that how people understand the foreign exotic quality is like, it's our little experience going to the Chinese restaurant and getting fortune cookie, and, you know, and then it's a piece of Asianness they're experiencing.
But can we talk about, like, you know, beauty then as a cultural construct? I mean, do you have anything?
I've had some, and this is not necessarily cultural, but a cultural maybe within the United States. But I've mostly lived in the Southwest, so I've moved between, well, Mississippi, El Paso, Arizona, and California. And my colors were darker, and when I got to LA like 2.5 years ago, it's like a completely different monster there. And it's pretty scary, you know. It's scary in the fact that there's just, I guess in terms of color, you know, I've never seen so much brighter colors than I've ever made. And the biggest painting that I have here on the show was like directly influenced to the colors that maybe in New York or in Chicago, and maybe they're all kind of heavily influenced by the minimal conceptual academic works that they're making. And I did that on purpose. My friend Francisco was like, you know, your paintings need a lot more color. They need to be brighter. You're in LA. And I just kind of wonder how that came about, because they're associating color with like what's in California. And so I did for that particular painting. But the other thing that I did besides the color, I try to keep a consistent. All my work is always about relationships in ways over others. There's a lot of metaphors in my work. But that particular painting, the big one, it's super colorful, and I used all those really bright colors. But what I associated to relationships is I started thinking of natural selection and the peacock effect, which is like in humans, the way that we dress to attract people, the way that we behave to attract people. They're traits that go over generations to attract people. So I started thinking of my paintings as the peacock effect, that what we do as artists. Maybe they're what we lack in our personalities to attract mates. You know, so I do this like really heavy like peacock, like, hey, we're attracting people. Like my painting, I'm beautiful. You know, like maybe I'm more attractive to you now, because that's what we do. We just kind of get close to these beautiful paintings. You know, that just kind of brings up something in you, something attractive. So it's called the dominant influence in the. What's called dominant influence in the. Anyway, they're all titled to terms of natural selection. So that's why. So that brings a color. You know, that's how I think of don't know, my paintings are probably part of my attraction or something, you know? So yeah, that's part of my, so that came in California, and that came in the cultural, me moving to different places. And I know that in Arizona, my colors were more muted, you know? So I don't know, maybe that's influenced me too. So.
Well, for me, color is like a celebration of life and also communication with the other people. And like I said, color not just itself, but also combination of color represent different culture, different generation, lots of different color as iconic images. You know, it's endless combination of everything. For example, you know, I talked about yellow a little bit, but in Korea, new bride wear red and bright green as a combination. And when she is wearing that clothes, everybody knows, oh, she's just newly married. And here in America, we use that color slightly different. It looks like Christmas or strawberry shortcake. So I'm really interested in bringing both different culture or more multiple culture. So color can be, as it combined with other color or in order, it can be a really interesting reading in a way, like not only talking about people, it provoke or move people's emotion, also color as a code, color as to represent different generation or celebration of life. And color in other country, to me, what's exotic is like when I look at the festival in Mexico, and like I look at the festival in Japan, lots of festival and like street cultures, and they're so much bringing color into the life. And I always get so fascinated by it, and I always have so stimulated of like my next project of it. And by removing that color, I don't know, when I was in college, I remember grad school, I remember one of my colleagues was talking about color as such, she has some notion of like some colors better than others, and she would say, oh, I will never use that kind of pastel color for my work, that's so bad. And I was like, is some color better than others? I don't think so. It's a matter of how you use it for your work. And I'm never afraid of use any type of color. For me, color is like an instrument, like artist, musician has their instrument to play with. Artist, as a painter, especially painter, not a sculptor, or like they could use color, but color is so much given for as a painter, two-dimensional person. So why should I give up on that? So that was always emphasized on my work, one of the elements.
Well, I was just sort of, thinking of color, as I said, culturally. I mean, maybe not to make overgeneralizations, but actually when I think of like Mexican art, I do think of a very colorful kind of, basic art. But am I wrong? I mean,
I was just thinking about this as you were. What I want to do with my art, I hope it's about discovering who I am as a person in this world, and not necessarily about the search of my culture, if that makes sense. I'm really happy of where I grew up. I'm really happy that my family, and all of us are Mexican, and I grew up in Mexico, and all of that. I'm content with the idea. But I explore. I want to explore issues of my personality more than I want to express issues about my background. And I think what I've found beauty in my work is discovery. And I discover things about my personality while I'm painting. My behavior mostly my behavior, and I know that my personality is in constant change, but there's things that I've learned about my personality that are constant and that give me confidence. And when I found those things, that's what I found beautiful in my work. So I know that we're talking about culture, which is really, really important. But I don't really directly want to explore that, I guess.
Well, I think we were talking about how it influenced you, what specific
well,
backgrounds
yes.
that you had.
I guess what's
Not to make it
influenced me
so,
is into. I don't know. My dad used to call me a contrarian since I was a little kid. You know, I'm always just trying to go against whatever is happening, and I feel and that's pretty much who I am. You know, like if there one thing is going to be there, I want it the other way, and I think maybe my culture has influenced me into creating this kind of work, indirectly. Yeah, and it's a little. You know, honestly, going back after 14 years, it's a little scary, because I wasn't doing art there, and I kind of wonder how that's going to influence me. But I also have to keep true to myself that I haven't lived there for 14 years to go back and do art that's about the border.
Oh, but it seems that, you know, I mean, people also, the longer they are in a certain place, you know, certain influences, their concerns certainly reflect that and change. I mean, the concerns you had at a certain point in time, you will not always have, even though some of it is perhaps deeply grounded, like you're interested in history or historical sources, and just wondering if maybe some of your interest in your interest in ornamentation or abstraction is, you know, one can just say you come from maybe an iconic tradition in some ways, and, you know, not the Persian miniatures, but, you know, in another really important way. Does that have any bearing on your work?
Yeah. Can you ask that question, rephrase that question for me?
Probably not.
Okay. Because I was thinking about something else when you asked.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, then we can, you know.
I'll try to segue into it.
Okay.
I think, well, because it's interesting that we've started off with this conversation about beauty, and the things that we end up talking about are culture and color, right?
Which is a form of beauty, no?
Which is part of what constructs our perception of beauty. Yeah. I think what's interesting to me is that the beauty is always subject to, I mean, first of all, class. You know, we talk about what's tacky and we talk about what's kitsch. I'm going to go back to kitsch a little bit, but you know that there's a certain kind of classist connotation there when we say something is kitsch or something's tacky. You know, there's certain aesthetics that are acceptable for certain people, and certain aesthetics that are not acceptable by other people. You know, so when we read David Batchelor at the beginning of this conversation and talk about, did you read that quote he goes to a collector's home?
Oh, about the white,
and he's walking through this endless kind of white home where everything's just white, and it makes me think about, you know, how full you know, so-called like Eastern homes are of stuff and color and patterns, and, you know, so I think there's something culturally specific and also perhaps class-oriented about how we perceive beauty, you know. Yeah. And so a lot of the aesthetics that are apparent in this exhibition are aesthetics that might be kind of brushed off by some as being, you know, like, well, you know, it's the idea of the Baroque, right? The Baroque is always another term that's used pejoratively, right? Oh, it's so Baroque, it's so gaudy, you know. And the fact that there's so much fullness in the work is something that's been really interesting to me as I kind of look through the book and walk through the exhibition.
Yeah, because you can also compare that to, let's say, you know, a Japanese architecture, a Japanese home, which is totally empty, right? And that's different too. If there are questions, there should be questions. We need questions. And I think there's a mic being passed around for anyone who has. So there is a question up there. Please wait for the mic.
Can you talk a little bit about space? Because I'm still feeling that even though this is very Baroque work, and I love Baroque work, it's still feeling kind of flat in a certain sense, with the exception of maybe Fausto, who gives a little indication of that, you know, traditional perspective, and then negates it with the mark making. So can you talk a little bit about space?
To all of us, or?
To all, anyone.
It's space. You mean space in the painting?
Space in the painting.
Like depth?
Painting space, yes, and decorative space, and.
Well, I can tell you, my paintings have architectural drawings, sewing patterns, and maps, and I've been using the same material since I was in college. And then they're metaphors. The reason that they're metaphors is because architectural drawings, they're places that are created by somebody else for us to live in. So in that sense, they're like a metaphor to society that we're kind of all here to help each other. The same thing with sewing patterns. So there are things that were created by somebody else for us to reproduce. So in that way, we're not completely free. We kind of all need each other. And the same with maps and all the instructional materials that I use in my work. These specific paintings in the show that I have up now, it's very different than other series that I've done. But it's interesting that it's included in a show that's called Beauty. Because the reason that I did that first floral painting is because my dad has always been really supportive of my career, but he doesn't really understand what I'm talking about. So I decided to make a floral painting. It's a Dutch or 17th century painting on my own style with all my same materials. And unfortunately, it sold really quickly. So I ended up making a series, which is the series that's in the show. And it's influenced by those paintings because my office, where my studio is, used to have a lot of those posters of floral paintings. And also, my current studio mate, he's Korean too, and he's a really good painter of, he doesn't paint flowers, but he paints like a classical work. So between the two, I wanted to just represent my aesthetic of what 17th century paintings would look like on my own style. And that's one series. And I don't know how long I'll keep doing it, but I'm always changing. I'll probably do some minimal work after, or sculptures. But I don't know if that makes sense. That's my depth in my work, I guess.
Well, okay, so the series that these paintings are from is called the Palimpsest series. You'll see the subtitle Palimpsest number 23 here. And palimpsest being the Greek term that for a tablet that was written upon and then scraped down and written upon again, you would see all the various kind of layers. And so I think the space in those paintings can almost be perceived as a temporal space. It's almost like the accumulation of layers that you're seeing. And the series was also partially influenced by looking at the walls of various cities and the kind of wear and tear, the graffiti and the covering up of graffiti. And so, yeah, I think that it's a pictorial space. It's not a perspectival space in my paintings.
Well, for me, when I think about space, I cannot avoid thinking about time. And space-time and kind of go together. And I always think about what to bring from the past and what as a present, what as a future. And all those things kind of crashing on the top of the surfaces. And then always they have a relation to my mark makings. So in the beginning is actually the most fun part. I like threw lots of paint, and sometimes the paint soaks through the paper. So it's not color sitting on the top, it's soaking, so it's become a part of the paper. And then when I use some impasto, kind of like a flat color, which is like maybe what you a lot of seen, layering on the top of the paper, they're actually sitting on the top of it because I sized with acrylic paint. So they're no more soaking. So there's a lot of layers, especially on my multiple fan paintings that you can see in the exhibition. Each fan has like different story. So I have like 30 put together. They're different stories, but then some of the fan kind of interacting. So like little iconography comes out and move to the next space. So they're kind of shifting little things at the same time. And I often think about me as a person living in the United States, in Atlanta, and I talk to friends in like Houston and New York and elsewhere, and then my mom, now she has a Facebook page and she can see what I'm doing, and I have a kid and I paint at night, and at the same time, I'm thinking about this is so crazy. We are so far away, but at the same time, we're on the same level. So it's just really, really crazy time we're living. So my space kind of represent that. So when I'm thinking about like, I'm watching local news in Atlanta at the same time in CNN, like somewhere in New York, somewhere in Korea, all this computer monitor screen like pop up at the same time. So I'm thinking about my fan painting. It represents like a fan as a form from like a reference from old, like a antique sort of like Asian traditional fan, but at the same time it could look like computer monitor or a little pop-up things that we click, or we look at cell phone and we have all this little thing to click to communicate with people. So like space and time, that's like really big terms, but I try to make it as personal as possible that everybody kind of can relate it to. So that's how I think about the space, and then my mark making and the way I deal with the material and method always kind of come with that idea.
There's a question here. Where's the mic? You've forgotten the question, right?
Thanks. Speaking of space, I was wondering how, because we're talking mostly about painting, and how these issues of beauty, ornament, and decoration shift when they're brought out of the painting space and into objects that then like vie differently for attention. Or thinking about, I don't know if the rest of you ever work outside of painting, but objects or sculptures or these ceramics that Jiha has in the show, how they kind of deal with these questions really differently than, because they have a different history than painting in terms of beauty and ornament and decoration. So I just wanted to pose that.
I recently started doing public art and community engagement projects. And my first public art project was, I did the floor at the Sky train station in Phoenix, Arizona at the airport. And it's, I don't know, I mean, it's pretty big to be my first public art project. I don't know if I'll make anything that cool again. I don't know, hopefully. But yeah, you know, it took a lot of different, because a lot of my, a lot of the ideas that I have in my work in painting, they're doing them in public art. It's super hard to just kind of add all those elements, especially when you have to like make a lot of people happy in the city and everything. So it started taking a lot of my elements that I include in my work, and it kind of started becoming a little flat. Like, so I kind of, I saved, what it is, it's a lot of shapes that mimic itself throughout the floor of an airplane tail. And the shape was the only thing that I managed to save that kind of related to my work, and the colors. But it had to be beautiful, you know, and it is pretty beautiful. And ultimately, you know, and this is something most recently, because I've been going through some conversations about people that are just talking about flipping art and selling art for money. And it was about greed and money, the conversation. It was somebody in Sotheby's or something. But anyway, what I saw that was different in the way that the three of us were talking about how we express about our work is that they express about our work in terms of money. So they take away all our concepts and ideas and deep thoughts and problems. And I guess I just never been in that side of the story, to where people just kind of look at art for what it is, you know? And if it's beautiful, then that's probably a good thing, you know? I like when people read things into my work that's probably not even what I'm thinking about. But I don't know. Sometimes it's hard for me to look at my work without any context. And I guess if it's just beautiful, then that's cool, I guess.
I was particularly interested in seeing Jiha's ceramic works in the show because it's something that I've also thought about as, you know, that when we talk about painting, we always assume, you know, oil on canvas or on paper or acrylic or, you know, maybe gouache, but we don't really think about the painting that happens on ceramics as painting with a capital P. It's painting, the action of painting on an object, but it's not painting as a fine art. And I think that history can be renegotiated. And I think Jiha's renegotiating it in a very interesting way. So I'm really interested in that kind of using objects and painting on the object.
Well,
and
you're
what-
doing the similar thing. Like I've seen a couple of work online that you juxtapose objects together
Yeah.
up against the panel of work, and then the patterns, and then the color kind of negotiate the history of what's going on and what's being done, and then you combine it with your own take on, and then the way you combine things together as a set of a thing, you
Right.
know, art thing. It's like, is it mini installation? Is it object? Is it
Right.
painting? Or what is
And
it?
the painting sort of becomes the
Right.
backdrop
I
for the
really, I
object.
thought that
yeah.
was really fantastic. I
So the
thought it
object
really
becomes the
interesting.
figure, and the painting's like the decorative.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an interesting way to kind of look back at the way that history has been written, and we've decided like this certain hierarchy of what's important painting and what's kind of decorative painting.
Yeah, but I think that that's all really shifting now. I mean,
Yeah.
the hierarchies are, haven't been, I don't think, that prevalent, I hope not anyway, for a while. And more ceramics and glass and textiles and, all of that have become considered fine art. And we don't talk about money, but even at auction, they are getting more.
Yeah, I hope they get more from it.
Respect. So there might be time for one more question. Is that good? Or more, or whatever. But is there another question?
No questions?
Doesn't anyone want them to define beauty, or
No.
one word? Okay. Well, okay then. Thank you so much.